Working group, not a committee, so we don't have an official chair, although Brandy did report out to the board last month, and I'm hoping she'll be able to do it again this month. So if you would like to say, I call this meeting to order, then we'll jump right in.
I call the meeting to order.
So for the first half of the meeting, basically, or however long it takes, basically staff on the working group have worked up some information based on the questions that came up in the first working group meeting. So one is just going to be a quick overview over what kind of tools we do have available for collecting data. And then after that, it'll be the info that we could gather on the specific data points that the working group asked about last time we met. So there were some questions about, what are the percentage of billed accounts that are for fines only, things like that. So we found some answers to some of those, and we'll just show kind of what we can collect and what we can't, and then we can take it from there.
Before we start with nuts and bolts, can I just make one sort of context comment? As I was sort of reviewing and prepping and going through stuff, I came across an email that had been sent from a patron in January of 2021. So it was shortly after the original no fines during the pandemic went into place. And this is not, you don't need to optimize everything we're doing for this particular email, but I just want to provide it as context. I think it's been sort of in the back of my mind as I'm sort of raising the questions that we're investigating. And essentially, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but essentially he was worried about, there was one particular book he wanted to check out and it was on hold and it was he saw that it was overdue and there were 14 people waiting, but it was already 2 months overdue, 2 weeks overdue or something. And it was triggered also though by the announcement of no fine. So he was concerned. I think it might be reflective or representative of, and I just don't want to lose this perspective. There may be a perspective among our existing customer base or user base that, hey, when you make this announcement, some people will be, that's great, I don't have to pay fines. Some people say, hey, the library works great for me and I don't want things that I care about to get worse. So I'm just, and I can send this, David, you have this in your voluminous, archives somewhere.
Yeah, I think I remember this.
Okay, right.
I remember who it was from. So
and I'm happy to re-share that to anyone here that's interested. But in particular, Brittany, when you mentioned, Dylan's got a bunch of PR announcements that we're going to be excited about this, and we're going to push that all out. And I think that's great, and it is something that we can be excited about. But let's also have those possible concerns of our existing users in mind. Especially, it's just a perceptions thing that I'm trying to bring to the table here.
That's a great point.
So let's make sure we address those possible perceptions at the same time that we're saying, hey, this is great, and brave new world and so forth.
I think some of that might come up in the data that we look at today, because some of the things that the working group asked about last month are along those lines, if not that specific issue. Right. Just like people's concern is how's this going to impact?
Yeah, exactly.
So
so it's just a perceptions thing, and that I just want to put that into context for maybe why are we going through this exercise.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for listening to that.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about PR, nothing is happening at this point without the board signing off on we're going to do this, So,
what I heard is, and it's great. Yeah. People are already thinking ahead. Hey, we're excited about the possibilities, and here's what it could look like. And I just want to make sure we include how we're also going to reassure the people that are concerned about the change that we've done this in a way that we've been thoughtful about that aspect of it as well.
Considered all those perspectives as well. I think that's good to keep in mind.
Yeah, and messaging is the word I would put into that.
Let's take a look. So I hate PowerPoints as much as anybody, but let's look at a PowerPoint. Okay, so this is just a kind of a data update. And the first thing we wanted to start with, we're going to show some tools here, and then we're going to answer some specific data questions that came up last month, and then the group will have a discussion specifically after that. So the first thing we wanted to show was This is not a data gathering tool, but it's just the current fine notification schedule. So this is how it works now if something is overdue at JMRL. And Brittany gathered this information from our circulation manual. And Brittany, you want to walk us through what happens here?
So currently, this is set up through both Sierra and our LX starter to send the courtesy notices. And so, patrons will receive an email notification 3 days prior to an item due date. And then after it's been overdue for 3 days, we send them another, we call them courtesy notice, phone and email. After it's 21 days overdue, the patron's card is blocked and they are notified by phone and email. And at 30 days overdue, a bill is sent to the patron automatically for item cost plus the $5 process. Processing fee is not negotiable because we have to kind of put that back in the system. But if the book needs to be replaced. And
To
then
clarify, it's phone and or email
right.
for the second and third bullet points.
Yes.
It's one or the other, not both.
And at 60 days overdue, currently JMRL turns the patron's account over to unique management. And that is automatically built with them. And then they kind of start their skip tracing process. And this is a little bit more about how that would work. Again, at 60 days overdue, the patron's information is automatically rolled over to the unique management company. And if the balance on the account is $35 or more, $10 collection fee is added. The patron is never going to pay more than $35 in overdue fines. If they're not in collection, they do pay that service charge if they have that. At 81 days overdue, you send the patron a second letter. They make lots of attempts to contact them about this item. Juvenile accounts have not been sent to Unique since 2016, and no accounts are credit reported since 2016. That is through the U.S. federal law that library fines cannot be credit reported. And accounts with fines of $45 or more do go into collection.
So I think there's a separate conversation here that Brittany and the customer service committee are interested in having about the use of unique management. And when we turned it on almost 20 years ago, they had tools that JMRL didn't have access to, that the skip tracing being one of them. They could find people that we couldn't find, and they could communicate things. They were also credit reporting people, which was an incredibly effective way to get people's attention, but not the best customer service. So now we have a lot more tools. Brittany mentioned LX Starter. That's the messaging tool that we have that sends out our newsletters. We're getting ready to send out branch newsletters, things like that. So,
Question.
Yeah, please.
On unique management, does JMRL pay a fee to have that service?
Yes.
How much is that fee?
$4,000 a year, something
Yeah,
around that.
4 or 5, it depends.
Depending on how many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's another thing.
That's what we're
paying out of the equipment fund. Save a little bit on
So
it.
we've had discussions about that with the customer service committee. With LX Starter, we have the option to make our own notices. Have an additional courtesy notice. If we want to, we can add our own final notice about if something is due. So these are something to keep in mind as we go.
Yeah, one thing I think staff is interested in, regardless of what the board ends up deciding here, is reworking some of these notification structures to have more frequent notifications. It depends, some people, oh, I hate it, don't send me anything. Some people, well, why didn't you tell me, the day of and the day after and the day after?
Is it possible if we were to do additional notifications, if a person could opt in or out of those additional notifications, or is it all or nothing?
You can't like this is the notification platform. You can't unsubscribe from the notices. We have had some that, may have marked as spam, but the rest of it, yeah, it'll just keep going, but you can choose whether or not you want the newsletter.
Right, so the things that we send voluntarily, you can choose. The notices are all or nothing.
And with a lot of people with Unique, they'll get the letter and not register that it's a library item that they need to return. So when I first started, patrons were still being sent to be credit reported. So I'd be getting even phone calls from people who were refinancing their house and didn't realize this. So that's kind of a separate issue with that, but that does kind of play into this in terms of how things currently work.
Okay, now we're gonna look at some tools. Just quickly here. So when we say ILS in the library world, that is Integrated Library System. And JMRL's is known as Sierra, not to be confused with Sierra the person. So this is just a snapshot of what it looks like. And it's basically a large relational database that has all of our patron information, all of our financial information for these things, for checkouts, and all of the item information and title information and order information. So it's a bunch of different library related things all together. It's actually what runs our online catalog too. And I'll just show you some of the out of the box tools that that Sierra comes with. So in the past, Mike, you've heard us say like, oh, we can't get this or we can't get that because it's a static database for so some of the information that you've worked on for GIS stuff comes from here, and it's like, okay, well, these are the only things that we can get. So we can get in patron records, there's a limited number of fields. What's her name? Reads a lot.
Rita reads a lot.
Rita reads a lot is our test card.
There's Rita.
She owes fines always.
She always finds. I got tired of messing up my own card, so I made Rita.
So it's things like what's your birthday, what's your address, what jurisdiction you live in, what's your contact information, things like that. And the only real information that is kept in the patron record about fines is the money owed. And then it has information about your total renewals, total checkouts, current checkouts, things like that. So it's very limited information. That money owed is just, here's what you owe at this time, right now. There's also information in our item records that says if it was overdue, when it was last due, things like that. So we have really one of these folks should drive this.
So even on that patron record, we don't see we see 5 checkouts, but you can't click through and see the list of what they are. And
yeah, I'll go back to that and show you. You can see that. So, here's the City of Charlottesville's development code adoption document. And on the item end, oops, sorry. Not picking on this, it was just the first thing I thought of.
20 people holding for it.
Yeah, right. The information that's kept is, how many copies, what's its, what type of material is it, what's the cost of it, when did it last go out? This is a bad example because this is a reference material that doesn't check out from the library, so it doesn't have any of this information about when was it last out. Who the current patron is, who the last patron was, when was it last checked in, where was it last checked in, the number of times it was overdue, last time it was overdue, information like that. So Mike, to answer your question, like, yes, you can see what a patron currently has out and you can see what the fines are for.
Yeah.
So in this case for Rita, they currently have no checked out items, nothing on hold, but they do have fines. This was a manually added fine, $3.50 for faxing. There's also a fines paid that would tell all the things. Based on the amount of time it's taking to load.
Like I said, she's my practice card.
So what it will have here is just the title, the date information on when it was due and whatnot. So, right. Whether it, these different categories here, whether it's overdue, renewed, it was an added charge, it was a lost book, things like that, a replacement. And it would tell you when it was paid, how much was paid, who you can get even more detail, like where it was collected.
It's realistic capability.
Yeah. Picture. Here's when that item was checked out, returned, assessed. This was waived. It was done by BDE, which is Brittany. So using that set of data, there's another tool here called Fines Paid, which we do use quite a bit. And it basically can search that information. So we can get a list here of, I don't want to make it too big because it's huge.
left it at it's easier just to type it in than to get the calendar, sorry.
So it shows you every fine there, and you can see some amount of detail there. But it also gives you this is what the computer system thinks was collected in overdue amounts, in replacement amounts, in manual charges, like that faxing that was on Rita's, that was a manual charge. How much was paid, how much was waived, things like that. So this is a tool designed to tell us how much money has come in, how much has been collected.
So the line item is, I don't see it here, but I'm sure it has an amount.
Yes.
And there's a category of what it's for, but does it say this one was, 4 days overdue or 12 days overdue?
Yeah, it has the same one that was on the patron field. So it says when it was checked out, when it was due, when the fine was assessed. So it doesn't exactly say that, but it gives you enough
Back it
information.
out.
to figure it
Okay, right. So you could get it sort of a histogram or whatever of how long our overdue times are.
Right, we've got a better tool now that
Yeah.
we're gonna get to in a minute, which is just direct SQL access here.
And each item, you can actually go back to the last 5 patrons that have had it, if you want to get regular with that, if you need to start investigating a specific situation with an item. Sometimes as librarians, we can be detectives that way. So if we need to, we can look at that as well.
Yeah, I don't, that wouldn't show here, this is only in each
Yeah.
individual patron.
Yeah, you have to look through each.
The other tool we have in the actual software here is create lists. I won't get too in depth in here, but it's just a way to search any given record and any given combination of fields. So, I could basically say, we want a list of every patron at JMRL. So we want patron information shot back, and you can say, give me every patron, and then you could query any given field that was there. Give me every patron whose birthday is tomorrow. Give me every patron who's got a telephone number that ends in 1234, things like that. And there's some limited amount of fine information you could find here, especially in items. I think it's in items. I made a note just because I wasn't used to this. Oh, if you did a patron query, actually, then you can see. If I'm looking for a patron, one of the things that we can look at is fine information there. And this is just that same data that was showed in fine paid. So we can say, like, where was it? When was it due? When was it checked out? That type of information, Mike, that you were just asking about, we can get just a broader, this is a quicker tool for that, basically. So these are the tools that come out of the box for working with our ILS. And in the past few years, they have opened up a bit our access to that data. It was always confined by what we can do with this software, basically. But Kayla has been working on cooler things.
We have SQL.
So before we move on,
Yeah, please.
can I just make a general comment? This is all great to understand
Mhm.
what the query capabilities are. Probably most people in the room think of it this way, but I'm just want to make some assumptions explicit. I'm not actually interested in how much revenue we get from fines or how. I'm interested in, to me, I don't think of fines as and I don't think anyone here does, thinks of it as a profit center. It's a tool to make our performance good, which means we want the books to go out and get used, but we also want them to come back. And that's what we're trying to optimize for, not information about the fines themselves. So again, what we're trying to maybe investigate is if we tweak the tool that we have to work with, which is and this comment also applies to the notification schedule. If we tweak the notification schedule, how is that going to affect the end performance metrics that we care about? So so I was asking more about things like hold times, and can we see, if we had a fine that was a certain amount, how on average or in sort of a histogram or distribution, how does that affect the amount of time the book is overdue? That sort of thing is what I'm more interested in.
We have some of that data.
Yeah. And I'll just throw out, and again, probably it's a preview to some things you're going to show. I was thinking during the notification schedule, what each of those steps, how did the pipeline shrink? Which one, is there one that's like super effective and there was a big jump? And then also when we get to the $45 or the collections or whatever it is, how many extreme cases do we have? Is it a tiny, tiny percentage or is it a tiny, tiny number that kind of doesn't matter? So I'm interested in a little bit of that, is just sort of understanding the shapes of what's really impactful at each step.
I think some of that is gonna get addressed here.
Yeah.
Some of it, we can then say, okay, well, here's our
Yeah.
tools. How would we get there, basically, to figure that out?
But I don't want to optimize the whole system for the tiniest
Yeah.
part of it. So I want to be able to understand that up front. At the same time, some of these are sort of deterrent structures that we have in place. Hey, I'm turning my book in because I know I'm going to get a fine, maybe. And so even if only a few people end up being extreme cases, maybe the whole, there's a broader case that's sort of being held in place by the tools that we have. So, okay, all context thought.
Okay, but this first part was just, one of the questions was like, how do we, like, what information is available? Like, how does the library get information? So this is just an attempt to show the working group, like, here are the tools that we have access to. And then we'll get a little bit into, like, here's what we've dug up so far, and then we'll figure out, like, well, what does the working group want to hear, and what can we and can't we do? So,
Yeah, so this is just an example. On the left is the tool I'm using, PG Admin 4, to run a query to find on-time check-ins. So it looks at our data, and I will show the results of this report later, but it shows over the last 30 days of items that were checked in, what was their overdue status? Was it returned more than a day early? Was it returned 3 weeks late? So it gives us that breakdown. On the right is the entity relationship diagram for the transactional circulation view group. It's kind of hard to see from here, but it's basically, these are the types of things that I can pull from when we're crafting these queries. So they've given us this tool. They don't necessarily tell you how to make these queries, but I've been reaching out to other libraries who do similar types of things, and people are always happy on the listservs to help. Hey, has anyone done this query before? What would you use? So that's the newest tool to me that I've learned.
okay, so now we're gonna go through what was asked last month, and then open it up from there. So the first thing that was asked is, the question was, I want to know from how many, blocked accounts that we talked about, how many of these were just for overdue items, and how many were just for late fees. Okay, so using that SQL, Kayla was able to pull this point in time. So this is
outstanding fines. So this is money we have not seen, but this is what people owe, the total amount. So the majority, about 64% there, are replacement costs.
it's 508. So that's billed.
Things that have been billed, but not yet paid. Manual charge, like David said, copies, ILL fees, out of area fees. Overdue is the amount of items that were checked in late. And so that's the amount of overdue fines on people's cards right now. Overdue renewed, kind of at the end, are those, oh man, Kayla forgot to renew it and it was due 3 days ago, so now she owes 75 cents.
So to your point, Mike, this doesn't tell how many items, like what's the impact of this? It's a dollar value, but it's roughly, what do we charge per bill? What's the blanket cost? It's $25 or $20. There's no item for an item. There's no price for an item.
15? 35?
15 plus 5, basically.
Yeah.
So that, it depends on the item, right? But it's like roughly $20 per thing there. So that big orange part shows that right now, the stuff that's overdue, most of it is excessively overdue. It's more than 3 weeks late, and the library considers it to be billed. And we don't think it's coming back at that point. That doesn't mean it doesn't come back. Frequently it does, but this is what's out there right now.
And if a patron does return the billed item, they're not going to pay more than $10 per item in overdue fees. So they have, that's an incentive to return things.
You want to share? What is this? Do you want to see this?
Sure, yeah, that, so this one, the query was looking at the location, like who owns the item. So that's where I kind of hid the rest of that just to make it a little more Less about where the books are and more where their status is.
So
So
now
doing
this
that
is something that you're tracking.
Yeah, tracking weekly, and it is, I'm gonna take a look at my query, just to make sure I've got this right. It's either 30 days from that point, or it's doing the whole circulation transaction table, which will eventually gather up to 90 days in the backlog.
So this is an example of something that we can start collecting, we are collecting now that could be used as potential baseline data or before or after data or whatnot. So like what percentage of things, now, of course, if there are no overdue fines, then the answer is that becomes 0 there. But we can see whether or not that impacts the money owed for the billed items. Does that go up? Do we have more billed items because people are holding things longer?
Yeah, I think, so a couple comments or questions. Is this blocked cards or is just anything, any patron that has a fine assessed?
Any patron?
Any.
Okay. And then, yes, I do kind of feel like number of items, it doesn't have to be the cost of the items, might be a better baseline just because, as you're saying, that some of these pie charts are going to go away, would go away.
Yeah, even if the board decided to do automatic renewals, that total overdue renewed, that would be 0. So if we took an intermediary step this summer, which we've talked about a little at first, and give people some grace period there, then it changes the overall picture. So the question is, can we see items, not charges? I'll have to go back and take a look.
Yeah, it would go to 0, but the question would be,
The big thing is, how much does that replacement change? Do we have more billed items?
What is the total adjustment following? What falls under that?
It's when somebody pays for an item that was billed. So say you've got your item over 21 days late, the system bills it and tells you, okay, you owe $19.95 plus a $5 processing fee. But when you then return it, as Brittany said, we cap it at $10. So that adjustment is the difference between them. It's the lowered, the biggest thing is the lowered cost between a returned item so that gives us some idea of how much stuff is coming back at a very delinquent rate as well. Okay, want to see another one? And we'll share this with the working group so you can see it. Okay, this was just the question was, out of the cards blocked, how many were for overdues, which means they owe more than $20 and can't use their accounts anymore, but don't have any billed items, and how many was they've got billed items. Okay, so 2,500 blocked for overdues only, 5,500 blocked for billed items. And we generally these days have between 90 and 95,000 users, period. So Mike, your question about like what percentage of folks there?
and so again, if the policy change was we're eliminating overdue fines, we've been talking about not blocking lost items, which is the same, I'm translating billed items to lost, that part of it wouldn't change. It would only be, the 2,500 would be the part.
Correct. So the 2,500 would go away, but the blocks would still be there. So the 2,500 people were apparent, they just returned their items 3, 4, 5, 10 days late, whatever it might be.
And this is also a snapshot, so it's not, this slide itself doesn't give me a great feel for if you get blocked for overdue, what percentage of those end up being lost or billed versus what percentage of those get returned in the book.
In my experience with situations where patrons call and they're like, hey, I just got this bill for a book. I didn't realize it was so late. I asked them, do they have it on their bookshelf? They go, well, yeah. I was like, okay, well, feel free to return it at your convenience, and then all you have to do is pay the overdue fine. During COVID, and we've seen this with juvenile accounts too, is sometimes parents don't realize that the item gets billed eventually. What they hear when they hear fine free is that there's no fine at all.
Yeah.
So once I explain, you just need to return the item and then there's no fine, we get the item back pretty quickly. So the rate of recovery can, in my experience, be pretty good once people understand what to do. So additional messaging for that may be required so that people understand fine free isn't actually fine free.
Doesn't mean you keep, yeah, it
It
doesn't mean a
doesn't
free
mean
book. It
Yeah,
means-
so we experienced that in two different situations
Yeah.
during, when everybody was fine free during COVID because COVID, but also when we started to do the juvenile card messaging in 26.
So that's a good point, because I was thinking spoke more to the second bullet. The 5,500 can actually transfer back to the 2,500 where they just, in the current system, pay some overdues. I was thinking more of like.
There is some overlap.
Yeah,
It depends on volume too. Like if you've got 5 items, then you're probably blocked for fines right away. If it's 1 item, then you might be able to use your card.
I guess I'd be interested to, again, these are wish lists, so maybe it's possible or not, but if you block a card, what's the histogram of how long does it take to resolve that? Like is that a step where, oh, I got this, okay, I've been getting all this stuff from the library and I ignored it, but now I'm blocked. Oh, I'm gonna take care of it right away.
It depends on the
Yeah.
person and how they use the library.
Yeah, right.
For some people, they may come in and the next week try to check something out, and that's when they find it out.
Right.
Some people, they may find out 2 or 3 years later. It depends on how.
Well,
they
I don't want to say, no, we can't do that, without chewing on it a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of a way to do that. Same for, I think you asked an intermediary question in there, which was, like how many things were in this status and then
Move to one or the other.
the other. So I don't know that, like, you saw, like, this feels a lot of time, like they overwrite each other. Like, here was my overdue date, here's the new overdue date. It's not keeping a history, but, so we'd have to look and see, but let me write down. before I
Everything
forget now.
Yeah, everything along these lines I'm saying is brainstorming.
Yeah, but the only way we're gonna know if we can do it is if we can verbalize what we're looking for. So
Well, there's
that
also-
one was,
There's also stuff of, is it even worth doing? But it's just a
I mean,
But yeah, right.
So what he wants to investigate is how long does it take for the user to be unblocked from after?
yeah, I think I got that one. I'm wondering if following the item is the way to do it.
And the motivation for that is I'm just trying to tease out which of our current tools are the ones that make the difference. So
That's why I mentioned viewing the patron history is there, because if you go granular with looking at the item, you can kind of look at that if we feel like
Yeah.
it's.
but also when I talk about a histogram or pattern, we have to tease that out we're talking about group behavior. So we have to somehow tease that out into an aggregate.
Okay, these are good. These are things that we can look at and see whether or not we can get, and some we might be able to find answers to, some. Okay, the next thing the board asked was about turnover rate, because this was a stat which Meredith uses, as she described it, as a rusty sword. Just a very broad strokes collection development item. Like, how is the collection doing? So she explained that the turnover rate is the total circulation divided by total number of items. So what she uses that for is to look at a subset of the collection and just say, like, how's it doing? So for example, if you took the young adult books on CD here, you could take the total circulation divided by the total number we have. That gives you a metric, and that tells you, baseline. You can compare this collection here to that collection there to see, like, which ones are performing better than others. So this is something that we are collecting currently. It gives you an average circ per item of a collection. We could do that. We're not currently, I think, doing that system-wide, but it's easy enough to do from our monthly report that we provide to the board. You could every month divide those numbers. Here's the entire collection and here's the circulation, and see what that changes if there's a higher turnover rate after this change.
So I think I heard you say you can do that, but you can segment that.
Yes.
So my intuition says some segments might be affected in different ways. New books, popular books, YA fiction, whatever they are, and then the reference stuff, maybe it doesn't matter. So I think this is just again, intuitively, and it sounds like it's something it's not extra.
We can get
a lot of extra instrumenting. Yeah, I would define some broad segments that users care about. Not, new nonfiction, I don't know, you're gonna
Popular
Tell-
children's series look
Right.
like new good people.
segment it out in some way that's granular enough where we can see that there's a difference, but broad enough where we're not, micro categorizing things. Yeah, and especially since we can do it, it sounds like we can do it today, that sounds like useful.
I'll have to double check with Meredith
Yeah.
on what scope she's collecting right now.
Yeah.
If it's the entire thing and if it's subdivided or if it's.
Yeah.
But we certainly can collect it moving forward. Going backwards, like the board report basically says overall circulation by location, but not by, it'll do it by branch, but not by collection within the branch. She collects some of that data, but it might be on the branch's, weeding schedule, basically. Like she shares every month, branches will be working on this section of the collection. She might share it out with that segment. So I don't know how granular the data is moving back.
Okay, but yeah, again, brainstorming phase. Backwards, I wasn't even thinking about going backwards, but that might be awesome.
Especially with the juvenile change. She also can collect the percent of items checked out, just raw. Here's how much of our collection is out right now.
Yeah.
So that's potentially a useful thing if that moves based on any of these changes. Like if more of it's checked out or more of it's available, it's something that we have the data for already. This doesn't involve using the tools that we have. This is something we're already kind of collecting.
The catch there is it's subject to higher level trends. There's a recession.
All of these things are, right.
Yeah.
All of them are. They're, when we start to get into the whole information there, they can be driven by a particular title even, that's a tremendously popular title that we're struggling to keep up with.
So I'll throw one other thought that I had over the last month, and maybe this is the place when we're talking about. So to the extent there might be, maybe we don't need this if we have this, but I was thinking of a proxy, spending as a proxy, and let me elaborate a little bit. So in this previous CEs, Meredith described kind of this careful balance between making sure you have enough copies of new materials and depth versus breadth, basically. Again, my intuition is that a change like the ones we're talking about, it's probably going to affect the hold times for popular stuff, just because there's more of them out there. And that would, as I understood, let's imagine that there is a change in that pattern. As I understood the CE, then from collection standpoint, we're trying to maintain a certain level of performance on the category. So the spending would shift perhaps maybe to more to that category and away from other things as well. I don't know if that's even correct or accurate, or if that's I don't know. You tell me what you think of that, of that theory. But I did have that brainstorm that maybe spending in the pattern of collection spending might be another proxy for how our policy changes.
Driven by other factors.
Yeah.
Like all these things are, but like not just a particularly hot title, but also state aid and things like that. So
Right, and recession is what do we have? 2008. You said, well, when
2008 is the busiest time the library.
Recession, everybody comes in. So and may or may not be. There's some volatility going on right now. Macro. Okay, well maybe if we have this, maybe and spending just is downstream from this turnover, then maybe it's not useful because we already have.
Well, I made a note. We'll look and see, like what level of detail there. Okay, overdue rate or percentage.
So this one was SQL query. So that one, believe this one is looking at a rolling like last 30 days. So I ran this today, and of things returned in the last 30 days, like 67% returned more than a day early.
On time.
On time. A day early, 4%. So the actual, if you click on the link there, it'll give me the breakdown of items. The raw numbers. And that one I think also goes by the branch maybe, or is that, no, it doesn't go by the branch. Oh yeah, that's a branch, I guess, branch where places are being checked in. So
things returned on time or early are 80 in the last 30 days, 82% of items are returned on time or early.
and then 1 day late.
2 to 7.
So and then the things that are late, 17.64%. So
To me, this and the hold information are the best baseline data we can collect. are things going to be returned later
Right,
because
exactly.
of this change?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's great. That's great. And can you said, this was a snapshot from today or whenever you ran the query of the previous 30
30
days.
days.
Are you also able to window that, like take earlier 30-day windows and go backwards?
It can only go back as far as our circ trans table,
which is-
and we changed that a month ago to be up to 90 days, but it's like moving forward, it will only have at most up to 90 days.
So we can only,
Previously had been 30.
Previously have been
well,
14.
we don't have access to that anymore.
Yeah, because it's right, it's rolled off.
Yeah.
Okay, but you could snapshot this every
This-
30
right,
days.
this is I think it's weekly.
I'm doing it weekly, every Monday I'm doing.
Great.
So this is just starting a baseline from now, basically.
So just probably might have thought of that, but you might, as you get weekly data points, you might construct the time series of each of those, and then you can track the yellow and blue and green lines.
Yeah, I think that's especially useful as we get into summer reading, like higher volume periods of use. Like we're gonna have more circulation in the summer than we do now. Does that pattern change? People are going on vacation or whatever, like do they keep their books longer? So that's gonna be the hard part, sussing out the, like, okay, well, what are the like, we know this is a driving factor behind this change, but what are the other driving factors? And what can we identify and what can we just say we think? Okay, fines rate. So this is just, we didn't actually do the math here.
I did a
Oh, you
little,
did?
yeah. So this was that fines paid table, but for last fiscal year, the money, money brought in. But so the again, breaking down more, there are things like with the manual charge that could be broken down even more, but that was that monetary breakdown of items.
I think the question from the working group was about like, what's the rate, like what's the average that we get in? So we can collect this data. We've got historical data here back 20 years. So we can collect any segment of that. If we wanted to see weekly for the last fiscal year, like how much came in weekly, and then compare that to a world in which we've made a change, we can do that. To your point, Mike, this is about money and finances, so it's driven by behaviors, but it's not maybe exactly your stated goal about the patron experience. Certainly, it's an experience for the people who had to pay it. But this is to answer that question about what's the rate, the fine rate, as I understood it. Okay, here we go. Hold wait times.
So this is another SQL query. Outstanding holds, average time to wait per person. And some of these like are outliers. It's something that our staff may have put on hold years ago that just because it's lost, and so some cleanup to be had. But for the most part, if you go to the right there, it's got I'm sorting it now by number of active holds and estimated. And then there's estimated wait time based on copies that are on order or copies that already exist. So
we can certainly get an average here of, average for all these items is 106
but that's a very
days, right?
well, that's also a very big outlier because of the ones that are like
Right. We would need to do some data cleanup here because specifically we have some titles that staff, like cataloging staff and technical services staff, have had on hold that have been missing for years because they're looking for this item. So we would kind of weed out just for patron facing materials, and that hasn't been done at this point.
You can and should do that, but I'll just throw out, if you use median instead of the average mean, then it basically the outlier influence goes way less.
It's less impactful.
Yeah.
I think this is the best tool we have
Yeah.
for hold time.
So again, I'm just trying to follow along. Is this one retroactive? Tell me again, is this a snapshot or were you? So this is the same thing because we only have the circ table for 14 days but now it's changed to 90 in terms of being able to go backwards.
well, this one is like what holds are outstanding, but whose holds have not come in yet. So it's
So there's no backwards version of that essentially.
no, only when I'm running it weekly,
Yeah,
going back and seeing.
Okay, but we're starting to capture it. What did
It's kind of frozen in time.
yeah. Oh, and maybe you talked about this in the data cleanup, but Meredith had mentioned a detail note, which is if you put the book on hold before it's actually available in the collection, so you might have think about how to handle that.
Read out. So if you see if what do you call it? Pre-publication, thank you. Because Sierra handles most of those for us, but somebody says, I want this John Grisham book that's coming out next December.
Right.
We will create a stub record and start adding names to these people are gonna be, they were the first to ask, so when we do get it, they'll get it. So sometimes, yeah, if the book hasn't been published yet, that throws that data.
I guess if you're snapshotting weekly, you would just exclude all those because
You can either exclude them or include them because they are always part of the picture.
but they're not. I don't think I care about it for my question of the patron experience because I don't think that's affected by the hold times.
Do we know if all of these have attached items? It's a bib level hold, right?
Yes, I mean, there are some that say copies on order, which those might be the ones, like the ones that say copies on order and have zero, I mean, we've gotten all
Okay, so we could do some sort of cleanup. The tricky part is just making sure that we would apply that cleanup every segment, right? You know, so that it's all apples to apples.
The ideal is you start the count of the days when it comes when it hits the circuit, the collection.
Somebody can actually take it home.
Right, but again, if you just you're going to be off by less than a week if you just exclude those, you know, weekly.
And some of this may also be affected by, we are having some delay issues with some of the vendors.
Yeah, actually, this is worth talking about for the whole board too, but we're having major issues in fulfillment from our number one vendor, and this is a national problem with public libraries. The largest vendor of materials of books for public libraries is facing some issues with contracts that they have had with publishers for a long time, and so there's a backlog, and a lot of people are switching to a secondary vendor, which is having trouble. So blah, 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 like hold times are longer right now than they have been in a while, not because there's less money and not because the technical services act isn't processing them fast enough, it's just they're not there. But that's, you know, things like that happen over time, historically, when we're gathering data for a long period of time, hopefully those will even out.
And patrons do call and inquire when they, you know, suggested a purchase or something like that. And, you know, our team can look at it and go, okay, so this is still being processed. You get an email when it's ready to pick up for you. And most of the time that reassures the patrons when we have that information.
So just a tiny detail. It seems to me there's also books where we've ordered 10 copies. Oh, now we got more demand, so we ordered 10 more. So in that case, you're going to have, it's still going to say there's some on order. And actually that doesn't work with the if you exclude the whole title, that doesn't work. So you're going to have to think about
We
that.
have to figure it out,
Yeah, that's trickier.
but also that happens constantly too. So I think, you know, for a big picture, that might not skew things that much. Okay, let's, this is a lot of text for basically, I had reported to the library board from an article that helped make up the CE I did on fines and fees, that a library had tracked what they called disappoints. And they talked about their disappoints either going down or not going up after after a change to fine free. So I contacted this library system, High Plains, Colorado, which is actually, I thought it was small. It's a huge library system. It's got like almost 25 libraries, I think. And basically they said now they don't have any metric or number for how they came up with that. Because it was 5 years ago or whatnot. And folks have turned over and they said that to the best of our knowledge, all we would have collected was complaints. Sorry, I can't highlight there. If anybody complained. So they think maybe that's the metric they used at the time, but I think I was interested in that too, because it seemed like the type of thing, to your point, Mike.
Well, it sounded like a defined.
Yeah, it sounded like a metric that
Yeah.
somebody was unhappy, right?
Yeah.
Can we track that? But it sounds like if they did anything, it was probably ticks at a cert desk saying like Brandy was complaining about not getting her book and then Jamie.
Randy came in again and complained about not getting her book.
And that was just for me not having professional librarian experience. I heard a
Yeah.
term. Is this a term? What I was
Same
asking
price.
for is, are there terms?
Are there
I
metrics?
don't know what they are, but you know, can you all?
So we've teased that one out and there's nothing there, right, that we can use at least. Okay, so I think that that was all the data that the working group specifically said, hey, can we get these things after our first time talking about it? So to me, the best ones came from Kayla, and it was that hold information and the time overdue. So we're collecting baseline data now. So that's a start. That's something we weren't doing a month ago before this group. This is a slide that was from the CE that I gave to the board 2 months ago and just tweaked it slightly. Like what can the working group recommend to the board, basically? So, we can say that we're here and let's make a decision and pass it on, or we can continue to talk about this some, but it's make no changes. Turn on the auto renewals, track some of this baseline data before and after, and then reevaluate down the road. So that's something that staff has talked about a lot. We could potentially turn on auto renewals and tweak some of the, turn on auto renewals. This would be a package, probably tweak some of the notification schedules, potentially talk about removing that collection agency, those types of things, kind of working around the issue there while we're collecting information, see what kind of impact that has, and then have this group or the full board revisit it down the road. There's the remove all overdue fines, which is the one of the things that the board has been talking about, and still block cards with excessively overdue items, continue to charge for damage and loss. And then there's kind of here's where we could do some other things that would maybe be customer service related, but wouldn't be as dramatic as as getting rid of fines altogether. I moved B there from being an option under D up to the second choice, because increasingly it seems to me like that might be a path.
That's my preference personally, because I'm not ready to say, okay, we're going to remove all the fees.
Yeah.
I think we do need to have more information that as the board and the library in seeing, okay, because one slide we saw, it was like an 18% difference that's affected if we remove fees. But could that change during peak time, lower time, when we go back to school in the fall time? So, and I think doing auto renewals, because life gets busy, sometimes you forget to renew your book, now you got a fine. It's a good bridge between.
We've been doing this as such a gradual process from starting in 2016. Juvenile cards, teacher cards. I speak with the customer service committee about that. The auto renewals are the next step.
Yeah.
And it's a patron expectation of people who move here that their system already has it. So
Don't we?
I frequently, at least twice a month, have people apply for cards and wonder why we don't. So to me, that's the best option.
So that, I'm sorry, the review took a little longer than I thought, just but we wanted to make sure we answered all the questions that came out of the first working group meeting. So now the question is just what are the next steps for this group?
Can we go back to the previous slide?
The one that said, thank you. Any questions?
No, the previous.
This one?
So, yeah, and I just, again, driving around in my car or whatever, some other brainstorms that I want to just share and toss into the pot. They wouldn't even necessarily graduate to being placed on the screen, but some things to think along the lines of. And I think of this, again, it's a tool, and we're just trying to, I'm influenced here by a book, Nudge, by Cass Sunstein, where he talks about choice architecture. And if you put a default is that you opt into something, or you default is opt out of something, for example, you get different. So are there sort of choice architecture or nudge-based options that can make people, we just want people to stop and think about, oh, I need to get my book back. I mean, really, that's the bottom line. And 25%, 25 cents is a lot of money for some people, but for some people, it's just like, oh, it's just something I had to think about, and it's annoying to pay the 25 cents. So could we do things like, you have to pay your fine, but now there's 3 boxes. There's the credit card, there's the personal check or whatever the check box is, and the third box is ask the friends of the library to pay the fine for me. Okay, so now again, these are all brainstorms and just to spark some thought. Now the library is still getting the funds, but the patron doesn't have to necessarily, it doesn't have to come out of their pocket, so they're not getting, there's not a financial impact for them, but there was a choice-based impact that they had to think about it and click the button. And so maybe that's a tool that would have an effect, you know, an effect towards our goal of getting the book back. Could there be, instead of, oh, we're having a blanket policy of no fines for anyone, could there be a account level flag? I'm going to opt in to the fines system, or I'm going to opt out of the fines system. And again, what is the default for that going to be? Is it default? If it's default opt out, then probably not very many people are going to click back to opt in. I might, because I don't. For me personally, I'm doing my circumstances. I don't care about the 25 cents, but it's a tool that reminds me, hey, you got to get this turned back in. And I do feel bad when the book sits on my shelf for a long time. Some of these, I should have, the caveat, some of these just might not be feasible to implement.
It's not even that. I was just teasing out what you were saying about feeling bad about the book sitting there. That's not driven by the 25 cents.
That's why this is a reminder. It's annoying that I have to look at every time I log in. Now it says I have 75 cents, and then I know I'm gonna have to talk to, either click on the credit card or, you know, talk to the librarian, but then like I don't have $2 in my pocket. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the credit card fees are a thing too, because JMRL absorbs the cost of the credit card fees. And when you're talking about 25 cents, like
Yeah, you're losing money on that probably.
And it is a dollar minimum at both our Square and online. You need to, so.
Well, I don't do it when I wait until it's enough to, you know, bother me. So that's just my personal, again, we don't have to optimize the system for my personal experience, but I'm just throwing out,
The way your brain works.
the way our brain works. That's part of it, which might have, I'm sure some other people brain worked a similar way. But again, the brainstorm here in terms of the system is, let's say we have this opt-out option, and by default, everyone is opted in. But when you get to these patron conversations where, oh, I got this book, and I'm having a hard time, and it's an issue. Well, just go to your account and click on, or I'll click it for you. I can click the opt out, and now that problem is solved. And then we get maybe the benefits of, we've addressed what's the word I want to use? The problem case is not the word I want to use, but the
Building goodwill.
well, the goodwill, but we're addressing in a more targeted way, perhaps with an approach like that, the cases where so I think what I heard is that sometimes the buildup of fines itself is an obstacle to getting the books back, because now they're apprehensive about that. So we could solve it just in those cases by saying, oh, we'll just opt you out, you know, going forward. And we have that option, and it's just neutrally available to anyone. But for maybe the majority of customers or patrons who, you know, just have a normal, you know, the historical expectations about how fines and fees work, maybe they don't need to be, you know, opt that out of fines, maybe. And some others along those lines.
Adding a courtesy notice would be helpful in which.
Right now we
Because
send
we
it,
could do that.
yeah, we send it 3 days before. We have the option of doing an additional one, so we could do 3 days before, 1 day before due date, and then.
So that's what I think about when building goodwill, is if somebody thinks a courtesy notice might help that, maybe we can do that like starter.
Yeah, Mike, we'd have to look at it. I'm not aware of any library system that offers kind of a tiered, when it comes to fines. I think most of them, you know, they want to, and I understand, they want to move monolithically, like the easiest thing for the public to understand, the easiest thing for the staff to understand, the easiest thing to make happen, you know.
There's that, and I suspect I'm a cynical kind of person. I suspect there's a certain amount of herd mentality. These guys did it, and we think it looked good to do, so we're going to do it without having really gone through these conversations. Maybe, but on the other hand, the one from High Plains, it looked like they had a group and they thought through it, and so I might be too cynical on some of that.
I think most of them, to kind of accomplish the goals some of the goals that you mentioned, instead would put out messaging like, if you're concerned about the loss of revenue, support our friends at the library, things like that, you know.
Right.
So I don't know. We would have to look. You know, you talked about like whether or not something is worth the time and effort.
Right. Yeah.
You know, this to me gut reaction.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
The theme I'm exploring here is how do we make people think about
Yeah.
that they need to get the book back in ways that don't. So yes, maybe a reminder serves some of that purpose, but I also have a suspicion that people get habituated to, I have all sorts of newsletters that I'm signed up to, and I don't
Sometimes just missing.
read them because I'm like, it's not even I miss them.
Now,
Yeah, I just see this I've seen this so many times that I know I can ignore it and it doesn't really, I don't have to do anything or think about it right now. So
last week I
We
renamed,
were playing with some.
I just renamed the subject heading and people seem to have liked that.
yeah, that helps, I think, because it said like library notice or something.
Yeah.
yeah, I know.
And I definitely think rebranding, rewording needs to be.
But Brittany,
Talked about.
to your question about would more notices,
Like one right before when something's.
yeah, so maybe, and I wonder if, I think we might have already heard the answer was no. That to me is something you could do as a pilot, meaning you test it with you do an A/B test, maybe, if you can do, again, is it worth the trouble? I'm just brainstorming right now. I'm saying no. But that sort of thing, it's not like we gave them a fine free and now we want to be able to take it back. It's more of, well, we just changed the messaging structure for some folks and not others, and we compared how that made a difference. I don't know technically if that's feasible with the system you're using to segment out.
To me, but we'll look and see like, hey, what.
Right, but I guess my point is, if you ask me, well, do you think such and such would make a difference? You can test it.
You know what I think?
Find out.
That is frequently the feedback I get about notices, and somebody would like a notice the day before
Yeah.
something. That might be beneficial.
I know for myself, having recently gotten hey, your book is due.
Yeah.
I always thought that was a 2-day notice.
Uh-huh.
And then I actually read it the last time I got it and I was like, wait, 3 days?
So that's something.
So that's an extra day to forget about it.
Right.
So what carrots and what sticks does the library system have to encourage people to bring books back? And like fines are one, right? The other one that we would still control in this scenario is use of the other resources. So that's something we could talk about, but then you're kind of balancing your goodwill with some bad will, saying like, okay, well, if you have things overdue more than, like right now, it blocks at 21 days, so it's 3 weeks overdue, right? Like we could shorten that window too, to say, and that we could do
Right.
locally or JMRL to say like, okay, there's no more fines, but if you
But
have
you're
things
supposed
out
to have
over a week,
10 days.
10 days, then you can't check more out. To me, for the people that are using the library, that would be an incentive. For the people that are just like, I get a couple books a year, then.
I worked for a system, it was if you had 10 cents on your card, you couldn't do anything. So it was harsh, but they felt it.
I will respond.
Yeah.
If you're making, in terms of the big picture the user experience that your hold affects other patrons. The few times a year they're just not gonna be contributing to that very much. So if it's a change that mostly affects the frequent users, those are the ones who have the ability, just as a larger group, can create more hold days, as a group.
You done with these?
Yeah, thank you.
These options? Okay, so where does that leave this working group? If we have to report to the board and the report can just be, we heard a bunch of numbers. We talked about data, we're collecting more information. What's the next step for this group?
I guess I would say the report should include, based on our good conversation so far, here's a couple of reports that we've identified as things we can collect and have already started collecting. So I think I heard at least two.
I think those are the big two that might be easily digestible for the
Right.
board.
Right.
And Brandy, I can even show those during the meeting.
You show it briefly or wait till I guess at that point you'll have several weeks, so you could have it.
I think it wouldn't be showing here's what the data says. It would be like, here's what we can.
The definition of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're still looking to get certain things answered, such as one note I've got written with the blocked card, how long until unblocked, like some kind of metric or to see that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to, this is probably one of those wake up at 2 a.m. and say, aha, I know how we're gonna do that, because I can't think of a way.
So,
of doing that.
I mean, so
I feel like we're in a collection period of like figuring out
Still
what we wanna get and like trying to pull out the necessary tools that we need
Yeah.
to say, okay, we wanna make a recommendation this way or a recommendation this way, or we just wanna table it and not make an option.
So I do agree, and let me just kind of restate how I'm thinking about this. Well, we said our top line is reduce barriers to access. And in the last conversation, we described that as barriers for people who we want to use the library more frequently, but also we've put the experience of existing patrons, we put that into that bucket as well. So there's kind of two halves of it. I think we should probably end up with, and maybe we're partway there for sure, and maybe not all the way, a consolidated or defined list of here's our metrics, A, B, and C, that were as a part of understanding what barriers have been reduced, what we're going to collect. So we've got 2 of those that we're starting right now. I think the next intermediate step is just finalize the rest of what that list is. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure from today I can articulate what the rest. If there ends up being 5, I'm not sure what those 5 would be. But I do think those, let's say there's 5 hypothetically, I do think some of them should be focused on the current patron experience, and some should be focused on people who aren't using the library, or in other words, there's 2 sides of this coin, and so I want our metrics to cover both sides to the extent possible. Again, the one side is making it easier for people to use the library who don't use it as much, who would otherwise use it if fines weren't a barrier in some way. Well, either because they just don't come in proactively. I don't know how we're going to find out, who those people are, or that would have to be some kind of a survey if it was even possible. But then secondly, people who are blocked, and again, it was a pretty reasonably compelling point to me that people that have fines just end up not using the library, but by reducing the fines, we actually get the books turned in. I guess that was more quickly. That was kind of a compelling point to me. I'm rambling, I know, but I just want to cover those 2 bases of who's being helped with this and having a better experience with with removing fines, and what are those metrics? How do we understand how their experience got better, or how their barrier was reduced? And then the flip side is, well, for the people who are frequent users or current users of the library, how do we reassure that their experience hasn't been degraded? There's probably going to be a trade-off, and how do we understand that we hit the right spot in that trade-off?
I think at last month's meeting, staff was left with very clear, like, let's figure out if we can collect these data points.
Right.
Those are bigger picture, broader things maybe, like, do we need a survey or things like that? So maybe we can start the conversation next month or whenever we meet again.
Yeah.
At that point, like how to collect that data.
Well, I guess again, my main point is I think that's a deliverable that we have, is here's whatever we decide, here's the 2 or 3 or 5 metrics that we're gonna track to understand that we're helping reduce barriers to access, whatever that means. And I'm not wedded to, and I'd like to do the best job of that's feasible or possible. So survey, again, I'm in a brainstorm phase. May or may not be something we think is worth the cost benefit.
I'm interested in what would trigger this group to make a recommendation about automatic renewals in the time frame I'm thinking of, which is July 1, and we've only got 3 board meetings before then.
And that is timeframe because of fiscal.
It doesn't have to be, but yeah, like that's generally when we would make changes that would impact the fines and fees schedule. So I don't, and the answer can be, okay, that's not possible during that time frame. Let's look at December instead. But I guess I'm not hearing anything that's like, okay, we need to hear this in order to make that decision. I think that's kind of we decide we think that's in the best interest of the library users.
My gut answer is we're sort of discussing that as a leap of faith type of change.
Yeah.
If we're collecting let's see,
It doesn't have the financial impact that the other conversation.
No, right, the finance is not part of it to
So
me.
that, to me, makes it more flexible in terms of what the board might decide to
Yeah,
do.
it definitely makes me happier that we've got two metrics that, and the whole times in particular, I think is the number one thing I've intuitively been interested in this whole time. If we've got 3 months of that, and then we're able to see afterwards, well, that gives me a feel that we've done at least a minimum baseline of a couple months. Now, we haven't, ideally, that would be a year, so you could try, capture, seasonal variations. I don't think that's necessary.
The hold times, the overdue renewals, items that have holds on them will still collect fines. So I don't know if that metric is gonna be, it'll tell us if behavior changes, but behavior shouldn't change, because if I've got a book out that Brandy is waiting for and I don't return it when it's overdue,
then it's still
it
gonna be
can't
out.
renew and it's gonna have a fine.
Again, I don't know if I followed all of that, but I'm most interested in, I'm waiting for this book, and how long did I have to wait to get it? Because, and so another flip side of the coin, maybe there's something you looked at that we could maybe baseline, is how long what's the, not the whole time with people waiting in line for the book, but what's the total checkout period for various materials? In other words, oh, this was 3 days late, and I'm, in my first period, and so I could click some buttons and renew it, but I'm already on the hook for the 75 cents, so I'm just gonna finish reading it and turn it in. Whereas now, okay, that decision point doesn't happen for another 3 weeks, right? So maybe the books used to stay out an average of, or median of 3 weeks plus 2 days, and now maybe there's a median of, 5 weeks, 6 weeks and 2 days, right? That might be an effect that would be.
So I
interesting to
think what
understand.
needs to probably be looked at personally, and this is something I'm gonna go and see if I can even do, going back with what I have, is going back to 2015, 2016, when we changed from juveniles cards being charged late fees to when we got away, like in that window, if there's a window that we can go back and look at that time period, and if there was an effect, what the effect was to the juvenile cards as a small group, and that would help to decide what the bigger removing from the rest of the population.
I think we reported on some of that in the CE 2 months ago. We reported like the year before it happened, the year after, and then looked at the current snapshot of juvenile cards. And it was just pure, was it circulation? I can't remember now.
Yeah.
So some of that I've got already because we looked at it a few months
Yeah,
ago.
I wanna go back and like take a look at that, because I know where I would like to see it go.
Yeah.
But I don't think Mike's quite ready to go there yet.
I guess with the overdue renewals, the way I think about it, Mike, this shouldn't impact the user experience unless you're browsing and the book that you would have found is not there. If you were specifically asking the library for a title, then the automatic renewals aren't going to impact that. If you're just waiting for it to show up on the shelf, then it might. But if you put it on hold, then the patron has to return it on their due date.
Oh, okay, I like this. And so the point is, the automatic renewal only happens if there's no hold.
Exactly.
Okay, yes, I somehow.
So that should not impact hold times. I think there will be some if the messaging will
If-
matter.
If the book's on hold by somebody else, then obviously it is due at 3 weeks.
Right.
But if it's not on hold, then okay, we're gonna renew this book for you, and it'll have
Right.
maybe a red message
Right.
for this book is not renewed versus your normal
I
green.
would guess that turning it on initially, and to Brandy's point about getting a bunch of notices, people won't notice right away. They'll just hear, oh, everything gets renewed automatically. I don't have to return
Like a
these.
color change or a font change
Yeah,
or
you're
a
in-
And
bold.
they're gonna have some fines, and we're gonna have some uncomfortable conversations about it, but then it won't happen again the next time because I don't know, we'll see.
Sometimes-
The point being that there's no free pass from the library, then they have to return the items if somebody's waiting on them.
Yeah, and staff will be prepped on how to message this out if we go to auto renewals so that they understand. Patrons will be confused at first.
Yeah.
Just like, when we went to no fines for kids, people didn't understand the difference between it not getting billed eventually and going. So messaging is kind of similar.
Yeah, that's a great point. So they would get, if they kept it for more than 3 weeks, they would get a bill, and they would
Yeah.
come in and say, well, how come, I thought kids' cards don't get billed. It's like, well, this we thought was lost because we sent you a few things and it never came
So that
back.
happens even now sometimes, but once that happened once, people understand. And so the customer experience improves once they understand what the procedure is.
So it sounds like we're kind of going in this direction of something we want to try. One step that could happen between now and either next month or whenever is, Brittany, you could write down the proposed changes in more detail. You're describing them.
Yeah.
But, we could schedule that everyone can look at and say, okay, here's.
That's a great thing for staff to
Yeah.
work on, for the working group to look at.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you have to do that anyways
Yeah.
before you do it. So you might as well
Timeline.
get the plan in
timeline.
place. And we
And potentially look at some of the messaging,
Right.
look at here's what it would look like. Can we make it red? Can we-
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we
I guess I'm pointing out, I think we're.
That's why I've already talked with some of the librarians at Louisa, and was like, okay, well, if we work with messaging, how can we do this? And
And so
different aspects I'm going to
you-
investigate.
savings on the-
Yes.
I think we're far enough along for this decision that probably is not wasted effort because
Okay.
you have to do it anyway.
And then we will also look back on the few bits the questions that came up today about, can we get this, can we get that, to see where we are on it. And I'll spend some time thinking about, Mike, your ask about, for fine free, we've got basically two different audiences almost that we would want to talk about this with. So what has meaning to each of them? If you're our current users, then how is this going to impact you? What will it mean to you using the library? If you, for whatever reason, are not using the library or have a blocked access to it, how is this going to change your potential experience?
And I would like to make a request for a chart to see how it changes for an authority day or whenever we meet next, and updated as to how it was broken down with the returns, whether it was 3 days, it's early versus what I really want to focus on are the things that were returned, is it one column? And then if it was 3 days, or if it was an extreme amount, just get an idea of how it changes from this month's page to the next time we meet.
You're talking about
Another
this
snapshot.
on-time
Yes.
check-ins?
Yes, I want to see how that changes, because right now we're looking at 18% difference. Is that going to be a difference?
Updates,
Yes.
time check-ins. Chris, is somebody trying to get in here?
Yes, somebody will be in the room in 5 minutes.
Okay, we will be out of the room in 5 minutes. Do they need tables?
They might actually.
Okay.
This group typically uses tables. I'll ask.
Okay, thank you. So a chart with
So I
update.
think that would be helpful in knowing.
And I can get together some scripts of how, other libraries have messaged this as they go on to auto renewals. That's, what we did when we went fine free for kids. And so look at, what most of those people have used in the past for doing auto renewals. If
Okay.
we decide to make that out.
Kayla, so are these the snapshot points you have? 319, 325, 331, 47? So we'll have like 8 of those, so we could maybe do something that charts the change in each one of these categories.
Yeah. If we leave 2 tables out, that'd be great.
We would love to. Thank you, Chris. Anything else from the working group?
I think we are good.
We're being kicked out of the
Okay.
rooms.
Good.
I think there's just more to think about, that this is great to help clarify things to think about. my intermediate step is, in my mind, is I think one of our deliverables should be, we're gonna come up with this consolidated, this finalized list of metrics. And if it's only the two things we have now, maybe that's what it ends up being. But to me, that's an intermediate deliverable here before, in conjunction with or prior to a final recommendation.
Okay, I'll start sending out some requests about when we can meet again. We were saying, for you to hear, Mike, that it is a very busy board time. You've got tech committee next week, policy committee, we have a
Budget
budget
meetings.
committee meeting, 2 board meetings, one of which is early. So we'll try to find a window in there, but it depends on everybody's schedule. Shall we adjourn?
I will adjourn the
Thank
meeting.
you. Thank you all.
This